Okay, we're going to do the Light Eaters reading for today. This is chapter 4, Alive to Feeling. There's a small quote. We're just a biological speculation sitting here vibrating, and we don't know what we're vibrating about. I was about to say where we're vibrating to, but it's because I was thinking about the vibe, which is actually a car. If you've ever seen a Matrix, same exact car, just different shell. Okay. This is by Funkadelic, Biological Speculation, written by George Clinton, May 22nd of 1972. Electricity is a wily force. It itself is not alive, but it is often the best sign of life. It's a proxy for aliveness, or it may be aliveness itself. Same car, different outer appearance. Electricity is entangled in every aspect of our living. It is behind our ability to move, think, breathe. It doesn't have a pulse, but a pulse has it. Or rather, electricity is the reason for the pulse at all. What to call something that it has its own, that on its own is not quite alive, but surely not inert either. So I'm going to read that again because it's kind of important. It doesn't have a pulse, but a pulse has it. Or rather, electricity is the reason for the pulse at all. What to call something that on its own is not quite alive, but surely not inert either? The theorist Jane Bennett calls it vibrancy. That appeals to me. Electricity has its own vibrancy. It makes us happen. Electricity makes plants happen too, or at least that's what science is looking like. From a certain perspective, a plant is a sack of water. Basically what humans are too, just FYI, as a little side note. Or slightly more specifically, a skin-like sack of cells, each inflated by a coursing watery liquid. And then it says in parentheses, same with us, by the way. Okay, I'll stop giving my commentary because sometimes it's just better to hear it from the book than some person that you don't probably know or necessarily whatever. That arrangement makes plants extremely electrically conductive. Electrical pulses move through the plant body very fast. But could plants be using that electricity to understand and react to the world like we do? To move, grow, send messages to their distant parts? Whereas most electrical impulses in our body are routed through our brains and spat back out as information, plants have no such recourse. So how in the world would electricity be a means of signaling, making meaning out of inputs, without a brain? Scientists right now are racing to answer that question. Several confided to me a suspicion about how it might be possible, an idea that verges on the mystical, or at the very least it verges on an entirely new conception of life, which so often starts out sounding like mysticism, doesn't it? Touch the skin on your own cheek. Feel that touch both in your fingers and its landing site on your face. Again, I'll keep my commentary to myself for a little while, but I am going to make a note. That feeling was brought to you by electricity, an elaborate chain reaction emanating from the cells on your fingertips and on your cheek, all the way to your brain and back again. In the human body, electricity works like this. The membrane potential of our cells, when at rest, is ever so slightly negatively charged. Positively charged elements, sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium ions, are afloat in the plasma between those cells. These are your electrolytes. When touched, the cells open their channels in their membranes and allow these ions to pass through them. Think of the sluice gates and canals that let water in and out. Suddenly, with the influx of ions, the cell's charge flips from negative to positive. This produced a burst of electricity known as an action potential. That sudden burst triggers an ion gate in the neighboring cell to open too, electrifying that cell in turn. This chain reaction travels fast, sending information via the electric current that the bestirred cells make from your finger and cheek to our brain and back again. Almost all of our cells are capable of generating electricity. Muscles are electrically active every moment that they're contracting and releasing. It's electricity that makes this movement possible. The same holds true for the smooth muscles around our veins, which contract and release to keep the blood flowing through our body. I am going to make commentary. I lied. It's kind of like peristalsis. It's what makes you feel the urge to use the restroom. It's the same ripple effect. It's like the wave when you're in an arena and they do the wave. Everyone stands up and okay. Same difference. It's a traveling movement of muscle in a wave form. Our brains, of course, are fantastically electrical, awakening us to the caress of our own cheek before we have time to wonder what the touch feels like. But what about when electricity diminishes? When humans are put under general anesthesia, they stop responding to touch. Touching an anesthetized person's body or cutting them open with a scalpel will not produce the same flurry of electrical burst it would under normal circumstances. The drugs interfere with our action potentials. Similarly, when researchers put Venus flytraps under general anesthesia by placing them in a glass case and suffusing the air inside with diethyl ether, I think it's diethyl ether. It's DIETHYL, ether. The Venus flytraps stop reacting to touch too. They don't snap close, but no matter how many of their trigger hairs are flicked, when the ether is removed within 15 minutes, the trap snap closes normal again. It takes 15 minutes to diethyl ether Venus flytraps, just in case that was like a life or death question that you ever needed to answer. The same holds okay, I don't know. The same holds true for the species Mimosa pudica, more often known by its nickname, sensitive plant. In its normal state, a mimosa will close its fan-like leaves at the slightest touch, folding them neatly like Venetian blinds. Keep touching it and the whole leaf will go abruptly limp where it meets the stem, like a wrist. Just saying. I don't know why, it just makes me feel like saying, how you doing? But, I'm not saying that. This is what it looks like. It just, withers over, This has a purpose. If you are a caterpillar eating a leaf that suddenly droops, you might fall off. But when mimosa is etherized, the plant won't close its leaves no matter how much it has touched. Peed seedlings, like the snap peas, are like regular peas, like grow in a pod, which normally wave their tendrils around enough over the course of 20 or so minutes that they appear to be dancing, will curl their tendrils inward, and their swaying will grind to a halt when under the influence of diethyl ether. When the ether is removed, they recover and begin waving around again. The mystery of plant electricity calls to mind other mysteries, bodily human ones. Our own electrical brains are made from wiring so secure. I don't know why I'm having issues pronouncing words today. Apologies ahead of time. Are made from wiring so circuitous that no map has yet been made of every pathway. So, brains do have ways that you can map them out when they give you an EKG, unlike your heart, or when they put the little nodes on your head, they can pick up brainwave activity. Just fun fact. Also, if you ever have an MRI, never mind. Our own electrical brains are made, we already read that. It also makes me think of the mystery of how anesthesia works on us, the unknown mechanism by which anesthesia can so blithely turn the switch of our own circuitry to off without snuffing us out completely. We do know that in the human brain, deep anesthesia appears to change the pattern in which electrical impulses flow. Brain waves decrease, resulting in a general dimming of activity. The flow of information, it seems, slows down or flickers out. In some schools of thought, the presence of consciousness is evidently mainly in its inverse, by the ability to be knocked unconscious. That's a really interesting idea, because if you think about anything as being unconscious, the invert, like if you're thinking about consciousness as being the inverse of that, then things like rocks may actually be the most conscious bits of atomical matter out there. Just as a, side note, I suppose. If you don't believe plants can be conscious, or that animals are conscious, or that even some people don't even believe that small babies are conscious, which in my mind is ridiculous. But they don't think that they feel much because they don't understand it. It's ridiculous. But well, at least in my mind, it's ridiculous. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, I suppose. I'm just going to read this one line again because it really is like super interesting. It's interesting mental mastication content, okay? The presence of consciousness is evidently mainly in its inverse, so the opposite of what we would think consciousness is, by the ability to be knocked unconscious. In that way, I guess you can't knock a rock unconscious, but you wouldn't think that you could knock a plant unconscious either. In our brain, electricity travels in waves. Information appears in colorized brain scans as pulses, like a wave traveling between two shores. The complexity and coherence of these waves are what neurologists routinely use to determine brain health and mental state. Christoph Koch, a chief scientist at the Allen Institute for Brain Science in Seattle, takes it further. He is a fan of a theory developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. Tononi? Sorry if I'm butchering your name. Sorry about that. Which argues that the complexity and integration of these waves are actually created in us as coherent feeling of reality. One way we sense our own consciousness. Consciousness, Tonioni argues, arises from the richness of this wave pattern. Koch, Tonioni, and their colleagues have developed a system to, at least in theory, measure how integrated these waves are. The more integrated, meaning the better organized each discrete region of the brain is, and how well those regions are connected together, the higher degree of consciousness is indicated. So if you have like a color map of your brain, right? However, these, we'll just say parts, the hemispheres of your brain, however well they're able to integrate with one another or communicate electrically, the higher the level of obvious electrical impulses sent back and forth, then the higher degree of consciousness is indicated. So when they're not connected, or if there's some type of impediment that stops the two sides of your brain, or maybe the prefrontal cortex communicating with, like, I don't know, the hippocampus or the Wernicke's area or whatever, you can have more of a disparse, like it's a further distance from shore to shore. If you want to think about the hemispheres of the brain as being shores of the ocean, like they said, it's like further to swim to get your point across to yourself. So it's consciousness is harder to obtain the farther apart you've grown from yourself. So thinking about that as an inverse part of self, and we're in the universe, the universe is outside of us. Your inverse self is what's going on internally. Using this formula, he believes that there is a potential for consciousness in all living organisms. For him, the difference between life forms is not about consciousness versus non-consciousness then, but about degrees and intensities of consciousness. That's what I was saying. Also, worth noting is the fact that sometimes you can have a whole bunch of information in that ocean or the sea or the water between those two shores. And sometimes it takes different experiential learning in order to trigger the electrical impulses needed to connect the two, which would, I guess, we could talk about hurricanes since it's Chris Koch, right? Hurricane Chris. Everyone needs a little ratchet in them. Sorry for my ratchet, you know, um, associations, but that's the association that comes to mind. So if you think about like a hurricane making land, at first it's in the ocean and it takes quite a bit of energy, electrical energy, as well as wind energy, water raining down, and a whole bunch of energy for it to make land. And once it makes land, that energy source has to be strong enough for it to continue on to land. It has to continue from where it's come from, make land, and then keep going. That's why it's scary, is because we don't know how far inland a hurricane is going to make it before it runs out of energy. A hurricane is not like a tornado either. They're similar, but they're not. I'm telling you, it's the matrix and the vibe. Okay, same difference. A bug has less consciousness than a person, but a bug to some degree is conscious. It's a gradient, and it all comes down to waves. There's an asterisk here. It says Anthony Chihuahuas, excuse me. It's like a tongue twister. Yeah, telling you today is not my day for pronunciation. Anthony Chihuahuas, joined by two colleagues, wrote an argument for using Koch's so-called integrated information theory to investigate plant consciousness. See Pedro Mediano, Anthony Chihuahuas, and Paco Calvo, Information and Integration in Plants towards a quantitative search for plant sentience. In plant sentience, theoretical and empirical issues. They're actually just telling us where we could go find more information about that specific little tidbit in the Journal of Consciousness Studies. It's in issue 28, number 1 through 2, pages 80 through 105, in case you're curious to go look it up. This waveform echoes throughout nature. A wave is a very good way to transmit biological information. Slime mold instructs its own movement by sending wave-like pulses through its body, which in itself is a single-celled giant cell packed with many thousands of nuclei. Once one leading edge of the slime mold has picked up the scent of nearby sugars and proteins, it softens the nearest part of its gelatinous form, causing the fluid in its body to bulge forward in that direction. So it's like drawn to it. The rebalancing of fluids causes the entire sac of the giant cell, numerous nuclei and all, to ripple in a wave, propelling its gelatinous body forward in the direction of food. Likewise, the slime mold can pulse with tiny contractions, sending waves through its fluid body to rapidly send signals to far-flung parts of itself, making its coordinated behavior possible. Okay, so this gelatinous fluid works the same way that I was just telling you the brain does. If we were thinking, electrical impulses of twisters and Mother Nature's inclinations on large bodies of water. Fungi, meanwhile, also use waves to consolidate information about their environment into bodily action. Mycelium, the ubiquitous underground body of fungi, may coordinate its millions of individual threads by way of waves of electricity. In this way, information about moisture and food can travel throughout mycelium, whose hair-like tentacles might form a mat spanning a hectare of forest floor. Okay, sorry, I was looking at my notes in the margin. If you don't know what a myelin sheath is, it is the part of your brain synapse, or the cells of your brain. It's the kind of rubbery, gelatinous sheath, I will call it. If you think about a wire, or even this pen, for example, you can see the actual pen. I could take it out, right? I could pull the part with the ink. This is the actual nerve. This is equivalent to a myelin sheath. Okay? That's the same thing that they're talking about there. I just thought I would make the quick reference between, us with plant life. But anyway, it's not called myelin sheath for plants. It's called mycelium. But that's why I'm messing up that word, is because I was trying to, never mind. Whatever. In the case of both the slime mold and the fungus, information is received, absorbed, and translated into a cohesive action without the need for a brain, and often that cycle begins with touch. Science have long observed that virtually all plants are highly sensitive to touch of any kind and will change their growth accordingly. They even have a word for this phenomenon. Oh gosh. Thigmomorphosis. Thigmomorphogenesis, excuse me. Thigmomorphogenesis, just in case you need a mouthful today. A whole mouthful. Darwin described touch sensitivity in plants in the late 1800s, but the phenomenon has been known to farmers for much longer. In traditional agricultural practices from many regions, whipping, prodding, or otherwise flagellating certain, not flatulence, that's a fart. Flagellating, though, is like stimulation. Same thing as flogging and whipping. You get the feeling. Beating the hell out of something, okay? Certain crop plants was thought to induce hardier growth or help prevent a plague of pests. In my mind, this doesn't make any sense. It's similar to someone saying, I had to be hard on you because it made you stronger. That is so mean when you think about it. Like, oh, I had to hurt you. I had to harm you because it built upon your character, or it helped you develop defense mechanisms. Unless you've enrolled in some type of karate class or self-defense class, that is BS answer, just FYI. In this case, they're trying to say that it helps the plant defend itself from pests. So if we're able to make the quick jump between a mycelium of a plant and a myelin sheath of a human brain, you can make your own assumptions. Make your own assumptions about it. I don't know. In the 1970s and 80s, a plant physicist in Ohio more or less confirmed this folk knowledge by stroking the stems of plants in a greenhouse each day. Mordecai Hoffe, or Mark to most people, found that repeatedly pestering plants made them tougher. That's what I was just talking about. It's questionable whether repeatedly pestering anything makes it tougher or whether it makes it. It's like kicking a dog. Do you think the dog is really just going to keep being nice to you? Or are you going to make it like a vicious animal that's going to bite? You understand what I'm saying? He began his investigation by fastidiously stroking several varieties of rather ordinary plants: barley, cucumber, common bean, castor bean, and English mandrake. If you stroked a plant once, it wouldn't change. But if you stroked them over and over and over for about 10 seconds, once or twice a day, they would change quite a lot. The response was fast. Within 3 minutes of his beginning to rub its stem, the plant would slow or even cease elongating, which it was otherwise doing all the time. When Hoffe stopped stroking the plant, Mark, we're just going to call him Mark because that's what they said on the last page. When Mark stopped stroking the plant, it would begin to elongate rapidly, even faster than its normal growth rate, as if making up for lost time. In Cherokee wax bean plants, the stroked stem would grow girthier and harden. It becomes impossible not to make jokes about this, but it was also serious business. Mark coined the term thigmomorphogenesis, and a whole new field of plant touch studies was born. I feel like maybe here's a good place to stop and do a reading. So that was chapter 4 from pages 75 to 80. We'll start off with the good old, hold on. Let's organize this a little bit. Ant deck. See what comes out there, and then I'll get some clarifiers. I don't think anyone even watches these videos, so I'm going to keep putting my little side notes in there, but porcini, the name porcini means piglets in Italian. Okay, this is Miss Piggy all over it. It's number 5. And I do think it actually came out in tech, whatever. We're keeping it in the upright. So we've got porcini. I kind of think the first thing I'm picking up on here, or thing that I'm picking up from the porcini mushroom, is the idea that, like, even amongst different groups of people around the world, there's a different level of sensitivity. So there's stereotypes that people make, but they have some sort of truth to them. In China, if you show a whole bunch of emotion on the outside, like when you're in public, you're considered to be weak. But in Italy, if you're Italian, showing emotion is the zest of life. It's the reason to be alive, is to feel emotion, to find things that are artistically motivational, whether that's in a positive or negative way. And expression of those feelings and of those artistic variances in feeling, or like the variety, the scale, is something that's valued. It's why Italian is one of the Romance languages and Chinese is not. No offense against Chinese, I'm just saying there's a big difference between the way that your pores, where you're from, where your heritage, your genetic input, just like a mushroom is kind of I don't know, maybe are they, I think they're fungus. Whereas, maybe a tree is more of like a fir or a pine. You understand what I'm saying? Then we could talk about aspen trees or oak trees, or you understand what I mean? Hot peppers. There's bushes that grow specific fruits and vegetables on them. I don't know that porcini is edible. I don't believe I've ever heard of a porcini mushroom. I don't think I've ever seen one. Portobello, edible. Porcini, probably not, just take a bite out of it before doing your research, but hot peppers definitely are, as long as you're not allergic. First cultivated in Central and South America around 3000 BC. So I want to say this has something to do with the spice of life. It's about realizing that pestering people in some cultures is normal. For other people, it's not. It's not normal at all. Okay, and having the fortitude to understand cultural differences is the same thing as understanding the differences as well as the similarities between human or mammal life and the plant life around us. Next came calendula. This did come out in the reverse. What I'm thinking is because it's a calendar thing, it's a timing thing. I think that there was a portion in there where Mark Jaffe, or Jaffe, Jaffe, that was his last name. he was talking about the elongation of a fern, and then the way that it recoils, but then that after you stop pestering it and leave it alone, it's actually able to make up for lost time. This calendula, the petals are edible and a good saffron substitute. Okay, this is number 3. In the reverse, this is I don't know why the word calendar came to mind. Each plant has maybe a different time frame that it's more considered in bloom or ripe for the pickings or able to make up for lost time or not. There's a sensitivity about plant life that applies directly to each specific plant, as well as just as equally and as well as mammal life or sea life, like aquatic life or whatever, avian life, right? Every life form has a specific preference. And there's nothing wrong with preferences. Some people are allergic to these. Some people just don't like them. Some people love them and everything, okay? Hot peppers. Who knows? Who knows? Okay, here's a honey agaric. Agaric is another mushroom. It did come out in the reverse. So that's what I'm saying. This one says, useful remedy for boosting your immune system. In this specific read, I did mention if you're allergic to hot peppers, there's never really a good time to like introduce things that are poisonous. I don't know if, this says that, it's good for boosting your immune system, but in which form? Is it the oil? Is it the root? Is it the cap of the mushroom? We don't know which part lends that healing attribute. Same thing with your brain. You're talking about brain mapping. This is talking about the entire porcini, like this little piglets, right? If you've got a whole bunch of little piglets and there's one runt, there's maybe not really ever a good time for the runt, right? But the runt of the litter, as you can see in Charlotte's Web, duh, just kidding, is it ends up having to eat a lot of hard pills to swallow, and there's never really like a really sweet moment until the very end of the picture. This is corn in the reverse. Okay, corn is actually really bad for you if you didn't know that. It's hard for your body to digest, but on average, an ear of corn has 800 kernels. If this was military, the colonel, the lieutenant, the I don't know, all the army ranks going down, right? They would all be fungi. Never mind. That was really stupid. If you've never heard that joke, I should probably look it up, but I'm not going to because I don't feel like it. This is dog rows at the bottom of the deck. Okay? This is kind of just saying to me personally that if you eat something, this is number 8. If you consume, this is the same thing I'm talking about for every single culture. I'm talking about for every single human, and I'm talking also about every single plant out there, right? If you're exposed to something that pesters you or agitates you, upsets your stomach, right? Upsets your stomach in any way, shape, or form. There's never really a calendar time. There's not a great, like, when do you want to get pestered? When do you want to be poked fun of? When do you want to be flogged? Never. Never. Ever. Ever. Right? And that's just like, it's not going to be sweet no matter if something does not sit right with you. Then also, like, I'm just whatever, I'll come back to that in a moment. If something doesn't sit right with you, let's talk about ghost pepper. If you ever tried a ghost pepper or seen the ghost pepper challenge on the phone where people eat a raw ghost pepper, it causes them almost physical pain. Most people, some people are actually kind of immune to it because they've eaten so much of it. In this specific case, there's not really ever a good time for that really hot moment to come along, right? That's something that you can't really sweeten up with a cup of water. Doesn't matter if you throw milk in your mouth. And it's not funny when you're going through it. It's not corny like, ha ha ha, Miss Piggy, right? It's not funny when you're going through it. This is the 3, the 9, and the king, all in the reverse. Because I'm not talking about specifically hot peppers. I'm talking about scenarios where you're put into a cultural difference, where you've consumed something spicy like the ghost pepper, where you are where you're put in a scenario where you're being eaten by a caterpillar or dogged out. You know what I'm saying? This is the definition of the dog rose, number 4, by the way, is can be used to make sweet syrups and jelly. So I do want to say what I was gonna tell you about this. Red Hot Chili Peppers came through pretty. If you've never heard that band before, there's also the Chili Jam Band. It's really good for children if you've ever wanted a CD. It's called this. I'm Starfishing. Really good CD for children if you have kids. And it does talk about some of these cultural uncomfortable moments, right? And although things can make us stronger when we go through them, it doesn't necessarily mean that we want to faux five, like we want to fuck around, find out, okay? We don't want to do all that. So sometimes you have to because life just puts you in a scenario where you have to, but sometimes life doesn't have to put you in a scenario. You know, they say sometimes you're saved from the fire, sometimes you're saved through the fire. One last reference, and then I'll cut this one off because it's kind of getting there. Pine cones from a pine tree, right? If they're not exposed to fire in the lifetime of the pine tree or the pine cone itself that falls off, the seeds of the pine cone don't ever really fully pop out. I mean, some of them will. I'm sure they fall out little bits here and there, or else we would never have pine trees, right? But the pine cone is actually supposed to be burned. Interesting fun fact next time you go shopping for a Christmas tree. That's all for today.